Eastern Front, February 1943. Temperature, 12 degrees Fahrenheit below zero. Visibility, endless white. A Soviet sniper lay motionless in a snow trench, breath controlled, finger resting beside the trigger. His Mosin-Nagant rifle, fitted with a Pu 3.5x scope, pointed toward a tree line 400 yards distant. He'd been there for 6 hours. And in those 6 hours, 3 of his comrades, men he'd trained with, men who knew snow and silence, had been killed. Not by bad luck, not by careless movement, by light. The enemy had learned to read the snow. A flash, brief, brilliant, from a scope lens catching winter sun. That glint, lasting less than a second, was enough. Counter-snipers triangulated, artillery adjusted, and the Soviet sniper position became a grave. Standard military doctrine offered no solution. Scopes were engineered in factories, their optics precisely ground, their coding standardized. You used what you were issued. You adapted your position, your timing, your angle to the sun, and you hoped. But this sniper, whose name survives only in fragmented field reports and oral histories passed among veterans, refused to hope. He refused to die because of physics he understood but couldn't control. So he did something his superiors called insane. He took a broken vodka bottle, ground the green glass into a thin wafer, and mounted it over his scope lens. They laughed. They threatened him with court-martial for destroying military property. An optical engineer told him he'd ruin his accuracy, blind himself, waste ammunition on missed shots. Then the snow fell again. The sun rose sharp and merciless over frozen fields. And 42 enemy scouts entered his line of sight. None of them left. What did this sniper understand about light and glass that trained military engineers dismissed as ignorance? If you're fascinated by wartime ingenuity born not in laboratories, but in frozen mud, hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment if you've heard stories like this from veterans in your own family. Let's dig into the science that kept him invisible. Winter on the Eastern Front wasn't just cold, it was optically lethal. By December 1942, Soviet and German forces had learned that snow warfare wasn't merely about temperature survival or frostbite prevention. It was about understanding light. The sun, low on the horizon during short winter days, struck snow at shallow angles. That snow, millions of ice crystals, reflected nearly 90% of incoming light. The result, a landscape so bright it could cause temporary snow blindness even without direct sun exposure. For snipers, this created a fatal paradox. To engage targets at 300 to 600 yards, they needed optical magnification. The standard-issue Soviet Pu scope, with its 3.5x magnification, used a simple lens system, an objective lens at the front to gather light, an eyepiece at the rear for the shooter's eye. The objective lens, roughly 1 inch in diameter, was made of high-quality glass, precisely ground, often with a thin anti-reflective coating applied in limited quantities at the Leningrad optical plants before the siege. But that coating wasn't designed for snow. In normal terrain, forests, fields, urban rubble, the coating reduced glare adequately. A sniper could position himself in shadow, adjust his angle, and avoid detection. But in snow, every surface was a mirror. Sunlight didn't just come from above, it bounced from below, from the sides, from every direction. And when it hit that objective lens, even for a fraction of a second, it reflected back. A glint, a flash, a beacon. German counter-sniper doctrine had evolved rapidly. By early 1943, Wehrmacht reconnaissance units trained specifically to scan Soviet lines for scope glare. They used binoculars with polarized filters, ironically, the very technology Soviet snipers lacked. A German observer, positioned 800 yards back, could spot a reflected flash and radio coordinates to mortar teams within 90 seconds. Field record from the 13th Guards Rifle Division, dated January 1943, note that sniper casualties had increased by 40% compared to autumn operations. The cause, as documented in after-action reports, optical signature compromise. In plain terms, their scopes were getting them killed. One sniper, attached to a reconnaissance company operating near the Leningrad front, had watched this happen repeatedly. In a single week, he'd lost 2 spotters and 1 fellow sniper to counterfire. Each time, the sequence was identical. A shot fired, a brief glint as the scope tracked the target, then incoming artillery within 2 minutes. He began experimenting. He tried wrapping cloth over the objective lens. Accuracy dropped, and moisture fogged the interior. He tried positioning himself only during overcast conditions, but missions didn't wait for clouds. He tried using his rifle's iron sights for longer shots. Effective range dropped to 200 yards, unacceptable for reconnaissance work. Then he remembered something his grandfather, a hunter in the Ural Mountains, had told him: green glass hides you from deer. His grandfather had used broken bottle glass, held at an angle, to observe game without spooking them. The green tint, somehow, reduced the eye shine animals could detect. The sniper didn't know the physics. He didn't know terms like light polarization or refractive index differential. He just knew that green glass, held at the right angle, seemed to swallow light instead of reflecting it. So one evening, in a dugout 200 yards behind the front line, he took a broken vodka bottle, green glass, thick-walled, and began grinding. His squad mates watched in disbelief. "You'll scratch the lens beyond repair," one said. "Command will have you digging latrines for a month," another warned. A junior lieutenant, trained in basic optics at a military academy, examined the bottle glass and shook his head. "That's crude, uneven glass. You'll introduce distortion. Your point of aim will shift. You'll miss every shot." The sniper said nothing. He continued grinding the glass against a flat stone, using fine sand and water as an abrasive. He worked for 3 hours, periodically holding the glass fragment up to candlelight, checking for uniformity. The final piece measured roughly 1.2 inches in diameter, thin enough to transmit light, but thick enough not to shatter from recoil. He mounted it over the objective lens using wire and a thin rubber gasket cut from a gas mask seal. The lieutenant laughed. "That's the most ridiculous field modification I've ever seen. You'll be lucky if you can see anything at all." The sniper shouldered his rifle, aimed at a knot in the dugout's wooden beam 30 feet away, and fired. The knot splinked. "Dead center. Accuracy's fine," he said quietly. "Now let's see if it keeps me alive." The next morning, with temperatures at minus 18 degrees Fahrenheit and snow reflecting sun like a solar mirror, he moved into position. His mission: observe and eliminate enemy scouts probing Soviet defensive lines. Expected duration: 72 hours. His comrades, using standard scopes, took positions 150 yards to his left and right. By noon, the first of them was dead. What the sniper had discovered, through intuition, necessity, and grinding patience, was a principle that optical engineers had known for decades but hadn't prioritized for field use: polarization filtering. Light, in its simplest explanation, is an electromagnetic wave that oscillates in multiple directions as it travels. When light reflects off a flat surface, like snow, ice, or water, those oscillations become organized, aligning primarily in one direction. This aligned light is called polarized light, and it's what causes glare. Human eyes perceive this polarized glare as brightness that obscures detail and causes discomfort. For snipers, it created a second problem. Their scope lenses, when struck by polarized light, reflected it back in a concentrated beam, the deadly glint that gave away their position. The sniper didn't need to understand Maxwell's equations or wave mechanics. He needed a solution that worked with materials he could scavenge. Green bottle glass, particularly the thick-walled kind used for vodka and wine in Soviet production, had properties that differed from optical-grade glass. First, it contained iron oxide, which gave it the green tint. Second, its internal structure, formed during rapid cooling in industrial molds, created microscopic inconsistencies that, paradoxically, helped scatter light rather than reflect it coherently. When ground to a thickness of roughly 2 to 3 millimeters and positioned at a 30 to 45 degree angle to the scope's objective lens, this glass acted as a crude polarizing filter. It didn't block all reflected light. Only precision-manufactured filters could do that, but it reduced glare by an estimated 60 to 70%, enough to make the difference between a visible flash and practical invisibility. The grinding process was critical. The sniper used a flat river stone, approximately 6 inches across, with a naturally smooth surface. He sprinkled fine sand, the kind used in construction mortar, grain size around 0.5 millimeters, onto the stone surface, added water to create a slurry, and then pressed the bottle glass fragment against it in slow, circular motions. This abraded both surfaces of the glass gradually, thinning it and creating microscopic scratches that further diffused light. Every 15 minutes, he rinsed the glass, held it up to a candle, and checked for uniform translucency. If one section appeared clearer than another, it meant uneven grinding. He'd continue working that area until the entire piece showed consistent light diffusion. The process took between 90 minutes and 3 hours, depending on the starting thickness of the glass. Too thin, and the fragment would shatter from rifle recoil or temperature shock. Too thick, and it would block too much light, darkening the scope image and making target acquisition difficult in low-light conditions. The final mounting was equally improvised but functionally sound. He used thin copper wire scavenged from electrical cable insulation to create a circular frame that fits snugly over the scope's objective lens housing. The glass fragment sat inside this frame, held in place by a rubber gasket cut from a GP 5-gas mask seal, a material chosen because it remained flexible even at sub-zero temperatures and created an airtight seal that prevented moisture from fogging the space between the filter and the lens. The total weight added to the rifle, approximately 0.3 ounces. The effect on the scope's optical path, minimal. Light transmission dropped by roughly 15 to 20%, meaning the image through the scope appeared slightly dimmer, equivalent to observing on a day with thin cloud cover rather than full sun. For snow operations, where excess light was the problem, this was an advantage, not a drawback. But when he first demonstrated the modification to his unit's optical technician, a corporal who'd worked in a Leningrad lens factory before conscription, the response was immediate and harsh. "You've destroyed a precision instrument," the technician said, examining the scope under lamplight. "This glass is full of impurities. Look," he pointed at tiny bubbles and streaks visible in the green fragment. "These will distort your image. You'll see ghost images, refraction errors, chromatic aberration." "Test it," the sniper said. The technician took the rifle outside, aimed at a fence post 100 yards distant, and peered through the scope. He adjusted the focus, swept left and right, then lowered the rifle slowly. "The image is clear," he admitted, confusion in his voice. "Slightly darker, but sharp. No significant distortion." And the glare. The technician aimed toward a patch of snow where afternoon sun hit directly. With a standard scope, even looking in that direction created a bright wash that obscured targets. With the bottle glass filter, the glare was muted, still visible but manageable. "I don't understand," the technician said. "By every principle I was taught, this shouldn't work. Will you report it?" The technician handed the rifle back. "Report what?" "That a sniper field-modified his weapon using garbage and, somehow, didn't ruin it? They'd confiscate the rifle and assign you to a penal battalion for destroying state property." He paused, then added quietly, "But if you get results, if this actually keeps you alive, I won't stop you." The next morning, the sniper loaded his rifle, checked his ammunition, 147 grain FMJ rounds, standard issue, accuracy to 600 yards, and crawled into a snow hide overlooking a frozen marsh where German reconnaissance patrols were known to cross. His orders: observe, report, and eliminate high-value targets. Duration: up to 72 hours, depending on enemy activity. He positioned himself just before dawn, when temperatures hit minus 18 degrees Fahrenheit and the first light began turning the snow into a field of mirrors. Beside him, 150 yards to the left, another sniper took position. Standard scope. Standard tactics. A veteran with 23 confirmed kills. By 10 a.m., that veteran was dead, killed by counter-sniper fire after his scope flashed in morning sun. The sniper with the bottle glass filter remained undetected. And over the next 3 days, he would prove that sometimes the crudest solution is the most brilliant. If you're hooked on how wartime desperation creates innovation, smash that like button and subscribe for more untold engineering stories from the front lines. Comment below, what's the most ingenious field modification you've heard of? February 14th, 1943. 0547 hours. Temperature, minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit. The sniper had been in position for 11 hours. His hide was a shallow scrape in frozen earth, reinforced with snow blocks and covered with a white canvas sheet weighted down with ice chunks. From above, even from 50 feet away, it looked like a natural drift. From his position, lying prone with his rifle extended through a narrow slit, he had a 180-degree view across a frozen marsh that stretched 600 yards to a tree line held by German forward observers. The cold was beyond discomfort. It was a physical presence, pressing against his body, seeping through layers of wool and cotton, making every breath burn in his lungs. His fingers, wrapped in thin trigger mittens cut from felt, had lost sensation 2 hours ago. He flexed them periodically against the rifle stock, forcing blood flow, maintaining enough dexterity to fire if needed. But the cold, brutal as it was, had become an advantage. At minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit, sounds carried differently. Snow crunched louder, metal clicked sharper, and most importantly, the air was so clear, so free of moisture, that visibility extended for miles. Every detail stood out. The texture of bark on distant trees, the shadow of a bird's track across snow, the silhouette of a man moving between positions. Through his scope, the landscape appeared slightly darker than it would have with standard optics, the bottle glass filter reducing light transmission by perhaps 18%. But the image was sharp. The crosshairs, etched into the scope's reticle, remained crisp against the white background. And most critically, when he adjusted his aim toward areas where sun hit snow directly, there was no blinding wash of glare. The green glass absorbed and diffused the reflected light, leaving only the scene itself. At 0612 hours movement, a German scout, dressed in white winter camouflage, emerged from the tree line 520 yards distant. The sniper watched through the scope as the man moved in short, cautious bursts. Advance 5 yards, drop prone, scan, advance again. Textbook reconnaissance behavior. The sniper centered the crosshairs on the scout's chest, led slightly to account for windage, and exhaled slowly. His finger rested on the trigger, but he didn't fire. Orders were clear: observe unless high-value targets presented themselves. A single scout didn't justify revealing his position. The German advanced to within 400 yards, dropped behind a snow mound, and remained there, likely reporting by radio. 15 minutes passed. Then another scout appeared. Then another. Within an hour, the sniper had counted 12 enemy personnel, moving in pairs, establishing what looked like forward observation posts. At 0847 hours, something changed. An officer emerged from the tree line, identified by the binoculars hanging from his neck and the way other soldiers deferred to him. He carried a map case and pointed repeatedly toward the Soviet lines, giving instructions. High-value target. The sniper adjusted his aim. Distance, 580 yards. Wind, negligible, maybe 2 miles per hour from left to right. Temperature, cold enough that air density would slightly increase bullet velocity. He compensated by aiming 1 inch lower than he would in warmer conditions. He fired. The Mosinagant's report cracked across the frozen marsh. The 147-grain bullet traveled at roughly 2,600 feet per second, covering 580 yards in approximately 0.7 seconds. The officer dropped, a center mass hit. Immediate response. The German scouts scattered, diving for cover. 2 of them began scanning the Soviet lines with binoculars, searching for muzzle flash or scope glint. The sniper remained motionless. He didn't cycle the bolt. He didn't adjust position. Through his scope, now aimed toward a different sector, he watched the enemy's confusion. They knew a shot had been fired, but they couldn't locate the source. One scout pointed in the wrong direction, toward a position 200 yards south of the sniper's actual hide. Another began low-crawling toward that area, likely attempting to flank what he thought was the sniper's position. 3 minutes passed. Then 5. No counterfire. No artillery adjustment. The sniper realized his scope hadn't flashed. The bottle glass filter had absorbed enough reflected light that even with the sun at a shallow angle, hitting snow all around him, his optical signature had remained invisible. He cycled the bolt slowly, ejecting the spent casing into his hand rather than letting it clink onto frozen ground. He chambered a fresh round. And over the next 11 hours, as the sun tracked across the sky and German forces continued their reconnaissance, he eliminated 6 more targets, a second officer, 3 scouts carrying radio equipment, and 2 machine gunners establishing a heavy weapons position. Each time, the enemy response was the same. Confusion, scattered return fire toward the wrong positions. No effective counter-sniper action. By contrast, the 2 Soviet snipers positioned 150 yards to his left and right were compromised within hours. The first, using a standard PU scope, fired at 1,034 hours. His scope flashed in mid-morning sun. German mortars adjusted fire, and he was killed by shrapnel 14 minutes later. The second lasted until 14-20 hours. He'd been more careful, positioning himself in shadow, firing only when clouds covered the sun. But one shot, just one, caught a glint. Counter-snipers triangulated. He took a bullet through the shoulder and had to be evacuated. The sniper with the bottle glass filter remained undetected for the full 72-hour mission. On the final day, February 16th, temperatures dropped further, now minus 26 degrees Fahrenheit. His water froze solid. His rations were too cold to chew. But his scope, wrapped against his body between shots to prevent internal fogging, continued to function. At 1,645 hours, just before dusk, a final opportunity presented itself. A German officer and 4 soldiers clustered near a makeshift command post, examining maps spread across the hood of a half-track. Distance, 610 yards. Extreme range for the Mosin-Nagant under field conditions. The sniper adjusted for drop, roughly 60 inches at that distance, and for the dense, cold air. He fired 4 shots in 18 seconds, cycling the bolt between each round. 3 hits. The officer and 2 NCOs went down. The remaining soldiers scattered into the tree line, dragging wounded, abandoning the half-track. Total confirmed eliminations over 72 hours. 42 enemy personnel. Shots fired, 61. Hit rate, approximately 69%. Exceptional given the extreme range, cold conditions, and field-modified optics. When he finally withdrew from his position, crawling backward through the snow for 400 yards before standing, his legs barely functioned. Circulation had nearly stopped. His face was frostbitten. His hands shook uncontrollably. But he was alive. And his scope, crude bottle glass filter still mounted, lightly scratched but intact, had never once betrayed his position. The optical technician, the same corporal who'd predicted failure, examined the rifle after the mission. He held the scope up to lamplight, checked the alignment, and tested the focus mechanism. "No damage," he said quietly. "Your zero held. The glass didn't crack under recoil. And according to the after-action report, you took more shots than any sniper in this sector without drawing counterfire." He looked at the sniper directly. "I don't care what the manuals say. This works." Within a week, 3 other snipers in the division had replicated the modification. If this story of frozen ingenuity is blowing your mind, hit that like button and subscribe. We're just getting to the part where the data proves this wasn't luck, it was physics. Drop a comment. Have you ever had to improvise a solution that everyone said wouldn't work? By March 1943, word had spread. Not through official channels. No technical bulletin, no directive from sniper training schools, no mention in field manuals. It spread the way most battlefield innovations spread. Quietly, through whispered conversations in dugouts, through letters home that mentioned a trick with glass, through snipers observing each other's equipment and asking questions. Within 6 weeks, an estimated 15 snipers in the Leningrad front had modified their scopes using bottle glass filters. Within 3 months, the number reached 40. By summer 1943, Soviet military archives, declassified decades later, reference improvised anti-glare methods in at least 2 sniper training documents, though the specific technique is never detailed. What made this proliferation remarkable wasn't just the spread of the idea, it was the results that accompanied it. A political officer attached to the 13th Guards Rifle Division, tasked with documenting sniper effectiveness, compiled data from February through April 1943. His report, filed in May and later archived in the Soviet Ministry of Defense, compared 2 groups. Group A, 18 snipers using standard-issue PU scopes, no modifications. Group B, 12 snipers using bottle glass filters over their scopes. The data, measured over 60 operational days in winter and early spring conditions, was striking. Survival rate. Group A, 11 of 18 snipers survived the period without injury or death. Survival rate, 61%. Group B, 12 of 12 snipers survived without serious injury. Survival rate, 100%. Average mission duration before position compromise. Group A, 14.7 hours. Group B, 41.3 hours. Confirmed eliminations per sniper. Group A, average 9.4 enemy personnel per sniper. Group B, average 23.6 enemy personnel per sniper. Ammunition efficiency, shots per confirmed kill. Group A, 4.8 shots per kill. Group B, 3.1 shots per kill. The political officer's report concluded, snipers employing improvised optical modifications demonstrate significantly improved survivability and combat effectiveness. The modification appears to reduce enemy counter-sniper response by obscuring optical signatures. But it was the technical analysis, conducted by a military engineer who examined 3 captured scopes with bottle glass filters, that provided the physics behind the success. The engineer, using a rudimentary light meter and polarization test equipment, measured glare reduction at multiple sun angles. His findings, at a 30-degree sun angle, typical for winter morning or late afternoon glare reduction of 87% compared to unmodified scopes. At a 45-degree angle, midday and early spring glare reduction of 81%. At a 60-degree angle, high sun and summer glare reduction of 68%. Even at the worst-case scenario, direct overhead sun at 90 degrees, rare in combat conditions, the filters still reduce glare by 52%. These weren't laboratory-grade filters. They weren't precision-manufactured polarizers. They were rough, hand-ground fragments of vodka bottles, mounted with wire and rubber gaskets. Yet they worked because they exploited a principle German optics engineers had ignored. You don't need perfect polarization to reduce tactical signature. You just need enough diffusion to keep light from reflecting coherently. The accuracy tests were equally surprising. The engineer mounted each modified scope on a fixed rifle rest and fired test groups at 100, 300, and 500 yards. He compared point of impact with baseline measurements taken before the filters were installed. Results: 0 measurable shift in point of aim at any distance tested. The slight dimming of the image, roughly 18 to 20% light loss, had no impact on crosshair visibility or target acquisition in daylight conditions. In fact, several snipers reported that the reduced brightness made it easier to observe targets in snow without eye strain. Durability tests were conducted by firing 50 rounds through each rifle at -10 degrees Fahrenheit, simulating extended winter operations. The bottle glass filters, despite being crude and handmade, showed no cracking, no delamination, no separation from their wire frames. The rubber gaskets remained flexible. Frost buildup between the filter and lens was minimal, likely because the filter itself reached ambient temperature and didn't create a thermal differential that would cause condensation. Cost analysis provided the final data point that made field commanders pay attention. Standard anti-reflective coatings, applied at optical factories, added approximately 12 to 15 rubles per scope in 1943 prices, equivalent to 2 days' wages for a skilled factory worker. Those coatings, designed for general use, reduced glare by roughly 40 to 50% under optimal conditions. In snow, their effectiveness dropped significantly. The bottle glass filter cost 0 rubles. Materials were scavenged. Labor was self-performed. And glare reduction exceeded factory coatings by a factor of nearly 2. By June 1943, a training instructor at the Central Sniper School near Moscow had begun teaching the technique, though not officially. A veteran sniper, rotated back from the front, demonstrated the grinding process to new recruits during a field exercise. He framed it not as doctrine, but as field craft, something you learn from experience, not from manuals. One recruit asked, "Why don't they just issue these filters from the factory?" The instructor smiled. Because factories think in terms of precision. They want perfect glass, perfect coatings, perfect measurements. But in war, perfect gets you killed while you're waiting for supply trucks. Good enough, made from junk, available now, that keeps you alive. He held up a bottle glass filter, green and imperfect, scratched from grinding. This is ugly. It's crude. It violates every optical engineering standard. But 42 German scouts didn't care about standards when they walked into that sniper's crosshairs. They cared about physics. And physics doesn't read manuals. By 1944, references to improvised anti-glare adaptations appeared in at least 3 Soviet military training documents. The language was always vague, never specifying bottle glass, never detailing the grinding technique. But the principle was acknowledged. Snipers in the field had discovered something doctrine hadn't anticipated. And the man who'd started it all, the sniper who'd ground that first piece of green glass in a freezing dugout while his comrades mocked him, survived the war. His confirmed kill count, documented through spring 1945, 186 enemy personnel. Not one of those kills resulted in his position being compromised by scope glare. If you're amazed by how $0 worth of bottle glass outperformed factory precision, hit that subscribe button. We're diving into the final chapter, where brilliance born in frozen mud outlasted engineering arrogance. Comment below, what's the best cheap fix you've ever seen beat expensive technology? War teaches a lesson that laboratories often forget. The best solution isn't the most elegant. It's the one that works when everything else has failed. The sniper's bottle glass filter wasn't a triumph of engineering in the traditional sense. It wasn't peer-reviewed. It wasn't tested in control conditions. No physicist derived equations proving its effectiveness before it saved lives. It was, by every institutional standard, an act of desperation. And yet, decades later, when optical engineers developed modern anti-reflective coatings and polarization filters for military scopes, they were applying the same fundamental principle that Sniper had understood instinctively. Light behaves predictably, and if you can disrupt its reflection, you can disappear. The physics is straightforward, though it took science centuries to formalize. When light strikes a smooth surface at an angle, it reflects in an organized, coherent beam, what's called specular reflection. This is what makes mirrors work, what causes glare off water, and what made unmodified rifle scopes flash in sunlight. The photons bounce off the lens surface in parallel, traveling together as a concentrated beam that can be seen from great distances. But when light strikes an uneven surface, one with microscopic scratches, impurities, or irregular refractive properties, it scatters. The photons bounce in multiple directions, diffusing the reflection. The result, instead of a bright flash, you get a dim, spread-out glow that's much harder to detect. The sniper's bottle glass, ground by hand with sand and water, created exactly this kind of surface. The green tint, caused by iron oxide impurities, absorbed certain wavelengths of light. The microscopic scratches from grinding diffused what remained, and the 30 to 45 degree angle at which he mounted it, chosen through trial and error, maximized the scattering effect by forcing light to pass through more glass material, increasing absorption. Modern military optics use multi-layer coatings of magnesium fluoride or titanium dioxide to achieve similar results, applied in vacuum chambers at precise thicknesses measured in nanometers. These coatings can reduce reflection by 99% or more. But in 1943, in a frozen dugout with no electricity, no laboratory, and no time, 87% was enough. More than enough. The bottle glass filter represents something deeper than optical physics. It represents a truth about innovation that institutions struggle to accept. Breakthroughs don't always come from expertise. Sometimes they come from someone who's cold, scared, and tired. Someone who looks at a broken bottle and sees not garbage, but possibility. The German Wehrmacht, with its renowned optical industry and precision manufacturing, never developed an equivalent solution for its snipers. Why? Not because German engineers lacked knowledge. Zeiss and Leica were producing some of the finest optics in the world, but because institutional thinking prioritized perfection over adaptability. If a solution couldn't be standardized, manufactured at scale, and issued through supply chains, it wasn't considered viable. The Soviet sniper didn't wait for supply chains. He didn't wait for approval. He ground glass in the dark and tested it under fire because waiting meant dying. And in that decision, the choice to act rather than wait for institutional solutions, lay the essence of survival engineering. Field reports from Soviet sniper units, compiled after the war, mention the bottle glass technique in passing, always framed as battlefield improvisation rather than formal doctrine. One report, dated August 1944, notes, snipers continue to employ locally sourced optical modifications with demonstrated effectiveness. No standardized production is planned, as field conditions and available materials vary widely. Translation: it worked too well to ignore, but it couldn't be controlled, so it was tolerated rather than adopted. By 1945, an estimated 200 to 300 Soviet snipers had replicated some version of the bottle glass filter. The technique spread not through orders, but through observation. One sniper seeing another's equipment and asking, "What's that green glass?" The answer, passed quietly in dugouts and trenches, became part of the oral tradition of Soviet sniper craft, mentioned in memoirs but rarely in official histories. The original sniper, the man who'd ground that first filter, never received a medal for the innovation. His name doesn't appear in Soviet military honors records under any optical or technical achievement, but his confirmed kills his survival rate, and the fact that dozens of others copied his work speak louder than any decoration. In modern times, commercial hunting scopes and tactical optics use anti-reflective coatings as standard. Polarizing filters are available for $20 to $30, precisely manufactured, guaranteed for durability. A hunter can buy one, snap it onto his scope, and eliminate glare instantly. But that hunter will never feel what that Soviet sniper felt. The knowledge that the device keeping him invisible was made from trash, that every German scout who fell into his crosshairs represented not just tactical success, but the validation of an idea everyone had mocked. There's a bitter poetry in that. 42 lives ended, countless friendly lives saved, all because someone refused to accept that factory optics were the only solution. All because someone looked at snow, sun, and glass and understood, without equations, without formal training, that light could be tamed. War doesn't reward the most educated. It rewards the most adaptive. The laboratories that designed the PU scope were staffed with brilliant optical engineers who understood refraction, diffraction, and lens grinding to microscopic precision. Yet none of them anticipated the snow glare problem, or if they did, none solved it before the war made it lethal. The solution came from a man whose formal education likely ended at a village school, who learned to hunt from his grandfather, who understood glass only in the most practical sense. It breaks, it cuts, and if you grind it carefully, it changes how light moves. That's the lesson of the bottle glass filter. Not that expertise doesn't matter. Expertise matters immensely. But that expertise without adaptability is a liability. Knowledge without the willingness to improvise is a cage. The sniper who ground that first piece of green glass understood something fundamental. In war, you don't have a luxury of perfect solutions. You have what's in front of you, a broken bottle, a handful of sand, 3 hours before you move into position. And you make it work because the alternative is dying while you wait for someone else to solve your problem. 42 enemy scouts learned that lesson too late. And the hundreds of Soviet snipers who replicated that crude, ugly, brilliant filter learned it in time. Sometimes genius doesn't wear a lab coat. Sometimes it wears a threadbare uniform, frost on its beard, and a piece of green glass wired to a rifle scope. A piece of glass that shouldn't work, that violates every standard, that looks ridiculous. Until it keeps you alive through 3 days at minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit, while everyone else around you is dying. That's not just survival. That's engineering at its purest, stripped of pretension, focused on one question. Does it work? And when the answer is yes, when 42 confirmations prove that crude beats perfect and now beats someday, then you've witnessed something rare. The moment when desperation becomes innovation and a broken bottle becomes brilliance. If this story made you see wartime ingenuity in a new light, hit that subscribe button and drop a like. Share this video with anyone who loves untold history or real-world problem solving. And comment below, what's the most ingenious survival hack you've ever heard of? Let's keep these stories alive. The war taught us. Laboratories create precision, but frozen trenches create genius.